Welcome to America Open for Business, where we talk with high-growth entrepreneurs and leaders who have found success in one of the world's most important markets.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cameron Heffernan, and welcome to America Open for Business. I'm very excited about today's show. Before we jump in and introduce our guest today, I'm going to mention that this episode is brought to you by us, your B2B Marketing, a truly global marketing agency. Many mid-market B2B companies, they face challenges as they enter new markets and expand across borders. So we handle end-to-end marketing from strategy through execution, allowing our clients to be free to focus on customer growth. So if you want to discover how we can drive your expansion, visit our website, yourb2bmarketing.co, not .com. And some past guests of our show have included Brian Smith, the founder of the UGG brand from Australia, and Ben Tija, the CEO, founder of Earthly Wellness, a $21 million direct-to-consumer e-commerce health and wellness brand. I also wanted to thank today Ryan Colley of Colley Intelligence, who was good enough to introduce me to today's guest, Bill Kenney, and give a shout out to Ryan, who is a great connector and a very knowledgeable person in the intelligence industry. So Bill Kenney, welcome to the show. Bill is the founder of Meet. Since 2012, Bill and his team have specialized in helping international B2B and B2G companies gain traction and scale in the US through trade shows, events, and strategic connections. Bill Kenney, welcome to America Open for Business.
Thanks, Cameron. It's so great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to jump in with you and welcome you to the show. I want to ask a big question to kick things off. So, by the way, MEET is an acronym, which I love. My Expo and Event Team. That's fantastic. How did you get into this area of marketing? Why trade shows?
Yeah, so I have a background where I used to run some trade shows. Certainly, as a business owner, we've done lots of trade shows. And so I guess in my experience, it kind of seeing both sides, both the sort of the exhibitor participant side and seeing the host side, it really gave me a view, in particular as a host, at the continuum or the span of competence that companies have at leveraging trade shows. And I think trade shows are different than many forms of marketing. You can put an ad in the paper, you can put an ad online, and that's more of sort of a response, a direct response type situation, where a trade show is it's roll up your sleeves, it's elbow deep, and you have to activate your not just yourself but your team to really leverage what trade shows are. So my point really is they're much more complex, and it's, I think, where our specialty is at least over the last several years in specifically helping international companies exhibit at US shows. That adds a whole nother level of complexity. So my observation is, US companies are challenged to execute trade shows well, and that is even more difficult for international companies, and ultimately, sort of in B2B and B2G marketing, every form of marketing, the real goal is to create meetings. And the really cool part about trade shows is you actually see people face to face. I mean, it is, versus many of the other forms that are, just, whether it's, picking up the phone or, online or whatnot. This, you actually have an opportunity to build credibility in person and create kind of more connection, and see people who are kind of likely in the looking zone, all face to face, which it certainly, it doesn't solve everything in marketing, but it certainly should be one part of the strategy anyway.
At a high level, how do you help people? What does Meet enable?
Yeah, I'd separate our service sort of into two buckets. One is strategy. So, whether that's what trade shows and events to go to and kind of having an annual view of that. And also in that bucket is, with each show, there should be a unique strategy, because there are unique buyers, unique buyer personas and all that. And they're going to all have different they're all going to have different value propositions that they're going to respond to, whether it's, unique industry or geography or whatnot. And so making sure that the strategy is very much aligned with the service being offered and the buyer persona who's targeted. Almost think of it like fishing, right? We want to look at, what fish do we want to catch at that particular show, and then where at the show they're going to be or how to attract them, and then what messaging will sort of attract, engage, and convert them into ideally a conversation or meeting. And then the second part of the service, or the other bucket, is really around the execution. So, it's sort of everything from what happens behind the scenes, such as, the negotiation with the host, the logistics, the personnel training, or we even do representation. About half of our clients, we fully represent them. In other words, we're their first employees in the US, so we take on all of that responsibility. And then kind of the last part of it is the measurement. We've built a whole suite of analytic tools, both from the sort of decision-making process around what events to participate in, to what we call a cookbook, which helps organizations prepare for events and properly task their team and hold their team accountable for actions pre-event and during and post-event. And then finally, the sort of the metrics post-event is, how do we value certain events versus others, or certain events year over year, and being able to look at it. And that ultimately kind of empowers the fourth tool, which is really around negotiating. So the ability to negotiate with trade show hosts. We've got an analytic tool that very much empowers that. And a lot of people negotiate emotionally with trade shows because they can't, they look at the stack of cards they came home with, and they, well, this stack was bigger than that stack. And so, and obviously that's probably not the best models. We've developed a really strong model that, ultimately, we've found good success in terms of getting much better value out of the process. And value at trade shows is kind of simple. It's the only levers the host has are, sort of money, what do you pay them, and value that they can offer. And they have a lot of choices of value, whether it's better location, additional marketing exposure, speaking. There's all sorts of sort of value levers. And so it's really kind of, how do we look at that and make sure, in each case, we're getting the best value for our clients' dollars.
That negotiation part is really interesting. I'd like to pick into that a little bit more with you, because I think particularly companies, if you're coming from another country to the US for the first time, and you're looking at going to a big, huge show, you see the exhibitor hall and think, man, how am I going to make an impact here? What kind of negotiation tips or tactics do you guys coach your clients through?
Well, yeah, let me say first is, if you're coming from another country and it's your first event in the US, I would definitely not go to a big show. Okay. Right. Because you might go and walk through and get industry intelligence, start connecting with partners, those types of things, all good. But in terms of exhibiting, number one, companies coming in, if they're early stage, don't need lots of prospects. So why go to a place where there are lots of prospects? And even worse, you don't want prospects spread all over the country, because that's exceptionally inefficient. I mean, in the early stage, I'd say you have two goals. One is, certainly to create traction, get customer dollars in exchange for your product or service. But parallel to that, and I think an equal goal in that first stage, is to build a repeatable system. And a repeatable system is very difficult to build if you have prospects and clients spread all around the country. And I just had a call with a company that, I mean, this is a true story. I just had this call. They have 100, they're a new company in the US, they have 100 clients here. And you go, wow, that's impressive. That's really good. This owner and this founder was so frustrated because they do not yet have a repeatable system. And the reason is those clients are spread pretty much geographically across the whole US. And even worse, they represent like 10 or so industries. And so they haven't found sort of the, an industry to focus on. And so, the first thing to that question is really, in my mind, is identifying a region or even a state to focus in, and an industry vertical, no more than 2, and build density. And there's a lot of reasons why customer density is important, or why it is important. Number one is, if you want to build a repeatable system, then, let's just say you build density in, pick New York as an example. You build density there, you've got 20 customers. It's very easy to bring another person in and say, okay, see what we're doing in New York, either take over New York and I'm going to go to the next region or industry, or I want you to do the same thing in Boston, or I want you to do the same thing in financial services, right? We can then use that as a model to scale. Very difficult to do if you've got to fly from, Atlanta to Dallas to wherever. Okay, now we've seen 2 customers, and so we want to really help that. But in terms of kind of making the decision about, negotiating for events, which was your original question, ultimately when you look at, the best basis to negotiate is when you have some history. So if we've done, let's say, a year's worth of events, and maybe you've done, let's say 10 of them, you can rank those events in terms of production. Our biggest, in B2B, our biggest indicator of sort of value generally with most clients ends up being the number of first appointments scheduled post-event.
Yeah.
So, obviously a lot of companies want to look at revenue, but the best because in B2B revenue takes 6 to 24 months to happen. We don't want to wait that long to have an assessment of value. And so, first appointment set, we know that if you begin analyzing sales, we know that a certain number of first appointments creates a certain number of proposals. A certain number of proposals creates a certain number of sales. All we have to do is look at sales history over the last year or 2, and we can come up with an average value for a sale and annualize that. And so we can then sort of create a value per appointment or first appointment, because that's some fraction of what ends up being the resulting sales. And so we can then go and say, if we 30 days post appointment, if we're consistent in terms of measuring first appointment set post each event, then after, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, begin going to those trade show hosts and saying, here's where your event ranked in our spectrum of events over the last 6 or 12 months. You're in the bottom half, or you're in the bottom quartile. We like your event, we like your audience, but something didn't work. And so help us walk through this with you so that we can get you in the top half. That's where we need to be in order for you to be considered again. So, maybe you can reduce the cost, maybe you can add some other values, whatever it is, again, we want to be here, help us be here, however we need to do it. But instead of the sort of antagonistic way a lot of people look at negotiation, this is really, our goal is to sit on the same side of the table, because if they want to retain us, which I, as a trade show host, I can tell you, retention at a lot of shows is terrible. And it's because, they ultimately, people are, just willy-nilly in terms of how they make these decisions, and they're not able to articulate why they're not happy, and so, and to come at it, in a more logical sense. And so, in any event, I think the more analytically you can approach it, the better a chance you have. And again, in a partnering way, not in a, we're not combatants here, where, we should have the same goals. And there's some trade show hosts that operate sort of like Cro-Magnon. They're not walking upright yet. They won't get this. But they may not be the best ones for you to work with.
Exactly. And of those 2 approaches, them lowering their price or offering you more stuff, which is more common?
Oh, offering more stuff, because
Okay,
there's quite often things that aren't expensive or at zero cost to them that are
yeah,
high value for you, and that's a win-win ultimately, because you don't want them to lose income. You want more value though.
yeah.
That's really in the end, that's really all you care about.
And you're having
Um,
those conversations with these trade shows organizers on behalf of your clients effectively.
Exactly. And to give you a sense of how big an impact you can have, we have one client who we're just working on a program for now, and this program that one of our clients is going to take advantage of is about a $25,000 investment.
Mhm.
So this host loves exposure.
Yeah.
We were actually able to, and one of the things that they like is exposure, are billboards. And for this client, we've helped them with some billboards. It's a military client, so they're out in front of bases,
Mhm.
and they want to be able to kind of have that exposure. So we were able to give this host a billboard in exchange for this $25,000 opportunity. That net cost to us was about $4,000 for $25,000 in value.
Nice.
We win, they win, and again, I think the more you can find, sort of that win-win situation, because you want ultimately in all this stuff, you want long-term relationships, because when you find good pipes, flows of prospects,
Yeah.
and you know this well, right? The adage in marketing is, we know, what was it, the CEO who said, we know that we're wasting 50% of our marketing dollars. We just don't know which 50%. So when you find pipes that work, it's really about how do we double down and get more flow from those pipes.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting things there. I want to unpack a couple of them. One is this concept. It works in marketing in general, strategic communications, trade shows, blue ocean versus red ocean thinking or concepts. I think a lot of companies think that's a big show. It's a huge crowded floor. We've got to be there. It's really important to be there among all these other people doing, variations like French vanilla and vanilla bean versions of what we're doing, versus a blue ocean kind of mindset or thinking would be, there's a show with 30 exhibitors. We can be there. We can actually book a cocktail reception. We can have somebody up on the dais. Wow, all of that is the package. Yeah, but it's really small. Is that where we want to be? Do you struggle with that, or do your clients struggle with that challenge?
Well, I think ultimately it's a matter of sort of educating the process. So,
Okay.
We've kind of learned, I would say, three truths in our kind of 12 years of doing this. And the first thing that we don't need to learn again, is that when you're entering a new market, your first priority should be, and particularly the US, because of our size and diversity of industry and so on, the first priority from a marketing and traction standpoint should be client or customer density. And so if that's the concept, if we sort of buy into that, and that's kind of our true north for strategy in that, that first phase, which might be 6 to 12 months, it may extend a little bit beyond that. It really, the measure of exiting that is a repeatable system. And it's when the founder can bring in one more person who can sell on their own. That's sort of the transition. So in that early phase, number one is, if you have customer density, think of the things, right? That person who is coming into the market to sell can come into one geography. They don't have, their time's already limited, but they can build relationships of whether it's partner or any type of support organizations or anything like that. It can be much easier. But then also all of their appointments are local. The hardest thing in entering a new market, whether you're in the US already or coming, is that first sale. And the only way the second sale gets easier is if there's some proximity. right? And proximity might be geography, it might be industry. It's probably a combination of the two. We certainly would advise that. But the second sale is easier because of what you learned in the first sale. You can apply to the second sale, right? The stories, you amplify the right things. You can do that. That also, if there's some reference that second sale gets from the stories of the first sale, right? You're in oil and gas. Well, that's really cool. One of our earliest adopters is another oil and gas company. Maybe you've heard of them. Whatever that can be. And then I think all the operational efficiency, there's just a zillion efficiencies in that. So again, if we think, if we agree that that our first true north in terms of strategy should be customer density, then everything should align to that. And going to a national show or a show in the US that is even global, again, it might be great to walk through and sort of get all the industry intelligence and all that. But the idea of exhibiting there is just wrong from so many standpoints if we bought into that strategy. There's a lot of wasted money. You're going to create prospects that are not in that sort of dense geography. You've got just a and you'll create them just at cocktail receptions. You don't even there's nothing egregious about that. But again, if you can really focus in on that customer density, it goes so much faster. And most of our clients come to us after they failed at US market entry. And it was so awful to have this call that I mentioned earlier, where this guy's going, we have 100 clients, and by any measure, they're doing well, except for the fact that he can't hire somebody to sell yet because he has no repeatable model, which he's just stuck. I've never talked to an owner of a business that felt so stuck because they kind of get to this and they have no more dry powder left to sort of pivot the process. And so they've put all this time in, and I think a lot of things that, the one thing that never gets talked about with sort of US expansion is time. I guess as I envision it in my head, the metaphor for me is this, that when a company begins that journey of expanding in the US, there's an invisible hourglass that sort of gets set down and the sand starts coming out of it. And it's going to be different by company and by sort of resource. But what people don't realize is that, that whether it's the founding team or the key employees or the family members, investors, partners, everybody's invested for a certain amount of time. And they're all going to leak, without, and kind of another kind of big concept around customer density is, these various stakeholders are all going to leak out at various intervals. But the easiest way to retain them and in fact to double down or to create more sort of emotional investment from them is to have base hits. To use the U.S. baseball metaphor, is to get, and frequency of base hits creates much more sort of continued confidence and investment. Confidence and investment keeps people, their eyesight gets very narrow, as opposed to when they don't see that. Gosh, what other opportunities are here for my money, my support, my love, whatever it is. And we see people go bankrupt. We see them lose marriages. We see their health go to hell. And it's all because they're so, like most entrepreneurs, right? We find shiny objects and we go chase them. Oh, I have a prospect in California, one in Oregon, one in Chicago, one in New York. Oh, kill yourself. Please, just
How many
save
times
yourself the time.
I remember when I worked in house, the stories I hear of the CEO changing the business model because of the person he sat next to on the flight across the country. And just that shiny object syndrome. I couldn't agree more. And so, what's your advice to a client like that? Focus on one niche, one area, one sector, and let's just get that down first, and then rinse and repeat.
Yeah, I think I would look at both geography and industry verticals. And so, pick a very dense sort of segment, and it's pretty easy to figure out where there's sort of customer density. And I would even, I think for most clients, I would even look at proximity and ease of access. So proximity to their home base or where they're going to be coming from,
Hmm.
so that it's easy for them, and whether it's their own time and whatnot, or it's the customer service and the relating time zone wise. Is it 5 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours? What is that, so that even when you're not there, the connection is reasonable. And then it's really just, from once you make that decision, then it's being laser focused on. And the good thing about that, and this is, I'll preach to the choir here for a sec, that when you're focused, you can do a lot of A/B testing
Hmm.
and get and believe results that you're getting. When you're spread across the country and you're spread across industries, and when I say A/B testing, we're going to A/B test, various media, various modes of attracting customers, whether it's trade shows or online or any other form. And then we're gonna test messaging. So what is, and if you're specific, you can have high confidence in what you're learning, and you can fairly quickly get to good answers.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're everything to everybody,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah.
You can't get there.
It's
And,
a
and
hard sale
again,
to make because you can't
you know,
stand out. You're not unique. You're not different. What I like to talk about with companies coming over, just take Europe.
yeah,
What is the competitive advantage you have from there that you're importing? Because you're coming into a new market. It's not like this didn't exist before. The person I had in my podcast, Brian Smith, was an exception to that. That was 1978 when he brought over these sheepskin slippers and boots from Australia. They were huge in Australia, and here they didn't exist. And he
mm,
was going after the surfing market. It took him maybe 8 to 10 years to realize that wasn't the
yeah,
core where he should be going. It was Midwestern families, coming back from hockey, and mothers that
mm,
needed them in the winter. So you go through those different things. You try things out. And I think when I work with companies that are headquartered overseas, I love, you said it, is leaning into, let's try out one area, one thing. Let's deliberately go to a place where it is a niche. We've got a
mm,
client in Austria, E+E Electronics, that makes automated sensors, and the production environments they're in. I would never have thought of these sawmills, lumber mills,
mm.
cannabis grow rooms, and weather stations,
Hmm.
right? So like
Really, and
our,
easy to target. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right. That's right.
yeah.
Easier to find. There's a gentleman I met a couple of weeks ago at an event. You talk to other entrepreneurs. What's your business? Pet cremation, right? Talk about a specific niche. He does
Mm,
pet cremation here in Central Ohio. His customer base are veterinarians,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And that's again, to find, he's offering them a great solution. That is a problem that you can solve right away. I love
Amazing. Yeah.
working with clients and businesses that are like that. And to me,
Right.
when I look at, from a content strategy, content marketing standpoint, trade shows are part of it, but
Mm,
it's also, who are the associations, the groups, the
yeah.
publications that they have that we need to be in.
Right.
Never knew so much about cannabis grow room magazines and trade shows in my life, but like, wow, that is a great solution and to me, I think of, what are the trends? What is your product solving? It's that
Right.
labor is really expensive or
Mm,
unavailable in this country, and nobody wants to do those jobs anymore. It would take you hours and hours to walk around and do all the measurements needed that you can do
mm,
right away with a sensor.
right. Yeah. And yeah, as you said, it's finding that, you know, who's urgent to solve the problem, right? Who's got whether it's the cost or the anxiety that's happening from this problem. And yeah, it's kind of what's keeping them awake at night. Really trying to understand that. So
That
no,
fishing metaphor is great. It works for me all the time. I'd rather have my clients sharp with a very sharp spear than this
mm.
huge net where I'm going to bring back everything in half the ocean, and there's for one prize fish that I might want.
Well, and I think you go through stages. Certainly, at the early stage, you just again, I don't, most B2B focused companies do not need lots of prospects in the early stages, and
Yeah.
in fact can't handle them. So why would we go to a large event, um, you know, to do that? I mean, that's separate from the idea that we want, to really build up customer density. We can't handle 100 prospects.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 to 10 a month, or 5 to 10 a week if they're really, sort of maybe more advanced. But getting 100 or hundreds at one time, they just can't handle it.
Now, how for you did you get into the international side of things? B2B makes sense, B2G, but why overseas headquartered companies? How'd that evolve?
Well, I had I have an MBA, and I had a finance teacher who was a great influence. And his viewpoint was, he had several, but one that really struck with me was a small business. The objective of a small business is to create a great lifestyle for the owner. And my wife and I both love international travel, and but I mean, that's kind of the fun reason. We
Yeah.
also saw that there was additional barriers and challenges that international companies have because of the lack of familiarity with the U.S. and then how to sell and how to attract customers in the U.S. I mean, there are all sorts of sort of nuanced and very prominent things, I think, that they're just not used to. And I mean, just the number of trade shows across the U.S. is insane. And then all the micro events, the local and regional meetups and so on. And so, we really felt, besides our personal interest in being international and engaging across borders, I think the need is even greater for what international companies need as they expand into the U.S. But, yeah, no, but we love travel.
That's a good answer. I like that. I can work with that. So I know coming up in a couple months is one of the biggest, well, probably perhaps the biggest show specifically focusing on FDI into the US, Select USA. If anyone goes to Bill's site, which I didn't mention, meetroi.com. First of all, he's got a fantastic array of resources, tools, cookbooks, calculators, advice. He has his own podcast, Belly to Belly, and a lot of the content currently is gearing up for Select USA. Tell us a bit about that show, why it's so important to companies maybe HQ'd overseas that are looking at the US market.
Yeah, so Select USA, this is the 10th year of the event. It's run by the U.S. Commerce Department. Just to give you a sense of the level of U.S. engagement there. So there will be, typically every year, there are somewhere between 5 and 10 cabinet secretaries that participate in Select USA, not just the head of the Department of Commerce, but many of the other areas of the U.S. Every state in the union, plus many regions, will exhibit there. So if you're looking to connect into not just the federal government, but into state and local governments, it's an incredible conduit for that. There are lots of service providers, support organizations that help or specialize in helping international companies prosper in the U.S. And then finally, there's just tons of content that really is beneficial. So in 2.5 days, and it's just outside of Washington, D.C., in a place called National Harbor, you can answer tons of questions that you would have about entering the U.S., whether it's, sort of all the jurisdictional things like tax and formation and so on, to the, where to expand and how to engage your first customers. Kind of all, it's kind of a euphemism this way, but kind of all under one roof. And it's really easy to access. And, it's kind of one of those events that, happens so quickly that you want to do as much. And part of the content we've offered is really around helping people pre-connect to the variety of resources they might want to meet. So we've done a lot of podcasts around with the various states and regions that will be there, and also a bunch of the service providers. So to the extent that companies have an interest in a certain region or need certain services, they can pre-contact, and then, you know, ideally by the time you get to Select USA, you're having sort of second and third level conversations, as opposed to everything being sort of new and preliminary. You can be a bit further down the road.
What do you tell clients when they've, again, we talked about the ROI with the trade show, and they say, we're all in, we're flying over the owner and a couple staff from Europe to go to this event. We're paying a lot to, opportunity cost is huge. All, you know, obviously the booth itself and all of that is high. What is part of your recipe for maximizing the number of engagements they have, so that when the CEO, he or she shows up, they're as full of a calendar that's booked as possible for the event?
It's a good question. So it's funny, we get asked every once in a while, you know, can you help us go to an event? You know, go to, you know, CES, or, you know, you pick the event. And so I seem to be answering most of your questions with two answers. So the first answer is, we wouldn't get involved in discussing an event, probably just the same as you wouldn't get involved in discussing, you know, an ad, or
Here's one article. Yeah, it's not my favorite way to proceed.
Right. I mean, so the output of our work, and I think yours very similarly, is how do we create a steady flow of opportunity, right? This is, you don't want prospects in April but none in May, right? We want you know, we want a steady flow, and ideally a steady and increasing flow of high quality prospects. So if that's the outcome we want, then the trade show is just one part of that puzzle, and it's likely a series of events that have all sorts of other marketing, you know, that's complementing them. So it's really much more an integrated process that, you know, that creates that outcome, and working process. You know, ultimately our marketing in B2B should be, you know, sort of stages. How are we? What marketing are we doing to create awareness? You know, trade shows are kind of good for that, but there are other, you know, inbound marketing and so on can do very similar things. And then what are we doing to create intimacy? What's building that, you know, trust ultimately is where we feel that prospect converts from a marketing activity to a sales activity. Once we have trust, we're likely able to schedule a meeting where we can then needs assess and present and so on. And so, you know, I think the first thing is, you know, if we can agree that the idea here is to create a steady stream of activities, you know, let's look at this event you're going to in that context. And so, you know, what can we do? You know, there are two outcomes ultimately that we're looking to accomplish at most events. One is, of the attendees, whether it's 100 attendees or, you know, 100,000, you know, one goal is to find the prospects within that sea. So what strategy are we going to use to separate the prospects from everybody else? And it may be, you know, a big number might be 1% of the audience, but it may be a fraction of a percent of the audience are prospects, which means we have to agree on what a prospect is. Because most people, I would say, and I see you smiling, we think of it as prospect creep, right? Which is, you know, what they imagine a prospect is just as sort of this growing. So a prospect very specifically has a need, they have money, and they're urgent. They have to have all three in order to be a prospect, at least by our definition. So we think of it as need, money, now is sort of the basis of the easy way to remember that. But so if our goal in the sort of that first stage of going to this CES type event is to find prospects, then what is it we're going to do to separate the crowd from that small fraction of people? That's one. And we may have a booth, we may be just networking, but we have to have some specific activities that drive that. The second sort of, and we may speak, I think there are lots of maybe opportunities there. The other is, and I think parallel, is we have existing relationships. What are we doing at this event to take those to the next stage? So we have existing, you know, prospects in our pipeline. We have existing partner relationships. And what are we doing to do those? And quite often these, you know, in some cases it's the same person doing both. But more often than not, if it's a team going, as you said, we can separate out. We can have 2 or 3 people focused on finding the prospects in the event, and 1 or 2 people in this second activity. So that means we're going to have one-on-one meetings. So that's you want to preset those. Like you use Select USA. At Select USA, I have generally average about 12 meetings a day, plus just all the networking activities and so on. But the more you can sort of build your schedule with, again, second level type opportunities, ones that you already have some relationship with, that, they're either prospects that ideally you're kind of, whether you're reviewing the proposal, signing the agreement, finalizing whatever you need to. But there are those type of meetings, and then there are the partner or multiplier type meetings where you're finding more common ground, finding ways to work together. And also, I think one of the things, and certainly in B2B, this is a huge opportunity, is account penetration. You may have the business in one division or one region. How do you get how do you then take that and go to the next region or the next business unit? And so I think there are a lot of those opportunities, and we tend to see, and particularly in the early stages, companies sort of logo hunting because that satisfies their investors, as opposed to what probably serves their business much better, which is account penetration, which is be efficient. The old, what is it, Boston Consulting Group, where they had the 4-quadrant thing. What's the most efficient way to sell? It's always selling more products to the same customer is generally kind of number one. And so obviously we want to have a mix, generally, but our dominant should, and especially at the early stages, to be efficient, selling more to the same people is and you're also defensive, right? The better relationship we have, the larger the switching costs, the more we're going to know about a company's needs and be attuned to any competitive threat. So I think in a lot of ways, I think that's self-serving, to make sure that you have that depth of relationship with your existing clients.
Trade shows can also be great places for intelligence gathering. The messaging is right there, front and center. It's on a banner, and learning about what the competition is doing. And I'll often tell clients, if you're not sure that you can do this event or do it right, go walk the floor, pay for a day pass, and go and not even with the intention of meeting people. If it happens, great, bring business cards, but you're soaking it in. If you're shifting from industry X to Y, the approaches that you use in X don't necessarily apply to Y. One of my clients in manufacturing support are doing marketing now more into medical device, and some of the outreach there, it's not about cost competitive, low cost labor. It's about innovation and forward thinking and sustainability into the future, not so much industrial manufacturing, dollars and cents per hour. So it's that messaging has to shift too.
It's funny you mentioned that. We just had a client call yesterday, and this client's going to a fairly large event in the US in their vertical in early May. And so their sales, they're almost like Intel. No one ever buys, well, only the industry buys their product. It's always embedded into some other, it's a component of a system, basically. And so it's all part, their goal is to have a lot of partner meetings. So we're helping them sort of preset a bunch of partner meetings. And so yesterday we were talking about the script for those meetings. And so there's going to be certain agenda items, but one of our probably biggest things that we were advocating is and we're sort of scripting this up for them is at the end of the meeting, you may not know the reference, but think like Columbo, right? There are 2 more questions, or there's another question you want to ask before you leave. And one is of the partner is who else here should we meet? Because those partners, they've been doing business in this space for mostly a long time, and this event is fairly large, and there'll be lots of partner opportunities. So who else should we meet? Can you introduce us, type thing? And the other is, what other shows or what other events are you going to this year? So thinking of this strategically is this company doesn't need lots of partners, and the partner sort of sales process is a process. It's not sort of one trans. We had one meeting and now we're going to be productive, because these partnerships are worth millions of dollars. And so the idea really is, besides going to events, once you get a certain number of feedbacks on what events people are going to, not only going to events that partners will be at, but we want to go to events that these specific partners will be at. We want to make reasons to collide again. That we're going to have, this company's based in the UK, so it's not, and all their partners are going to be all over the US. So having these convening points, places, we know we're going to see, we saw you in May, we know we're going to see you again in August, we know we're going to see you again in October, whatever the case is. But at least what we find, particularly as geography, is we all get separated by geography. Having points on the calendar that we know we're going to interact again, whether we have a consistent, Zoom interaction, or we're going to see each other at these events, makes things happen. They also act as deadlines, and so having gosh, I can't show up at that event without having these answers or having that contract or whatever the case is. So a big part of this is, once they're in the funnel, is how do we nurture that relationship to the place at which it's productive, and then obviously more productive, and so having that as part of the strategy. So you really think through, this isn't about, no one wins by having more partner prospects. You win by having productive partnerships. And so it's, how do we get them to that place?
I love to just thinking of events as part of an integrated annual marketing strategy. You've got those events across the year, and it's a reason to be in touch, and it's an excuse to reach out. Are you going to come to this event in October? Plop in a webinar in between. We had a really good success with a client that built a relationship with a publication in the wire harness sector, somewhat obscure, very labor intensive, but no one else had it with them. They had they're now going on their 4-year partnership. Every year before the biggest trade show in person in Milwaukee for this event is their webinar. And it's become branded. It's become a thing that they do every year. And they have a great relationship with the publisher and the editor, and they kind of own that space. And I like to look at great success to build on. What's the next one that we need to consider? What's the next industry or area that we need to branch out? I'd rather have them go to a show with 15, like I said, 15 exhibitors, than a huge one where they're just lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, well, a whole nother topic, maybe for another time, is events. Trade shows are really a 365-day a year opportunity, and to the point of integrated marketing, it's because you're relating to an audience. How do you, the trade show is just the excuse to relate, but it's, it's how do you look at, I think the more savvy trade show hosts are really beginning to understand that, because it's very hard, so many things can affect the actual day of, right, or days of, bad weather can affect, and COVID was such a invasive thing. But how do you relate to that audience? At least looking at it minimum as sort of the 3 months before and the 3 months after. But I think the more sophisticated are looking at how do we relate much more in an annualized way, because it's and that's where the integrated marketing really can take hold, whether we're doing webinars or we're having writing various posts on the host website or on their LinkedIn. I think there are just tons and tons of strategies, press releases, and
collateral,
and so on, that
leave behind pieces you need to have at the end of the show. I'm going to ask you one last question, Bill, before I do that, throw that at you, just to thank you for coming on the show. This is fantastic for takeaway. I knew it would be. I encourage people who are interested to check out Bill Kenney's website, meetroi.com. Very rich resources and tools. My last question for you is, you're engaging with a client for the first time. They're coming to you. They want to be at Select USA. What's the one takeaway you're going to really emphasize for them more than any other?
it all starts with goals. Sort of, if they're going to Select USA or any other event, what is it you want to answer, or as an outcome for that, and then it's really aligning everything to that. So, if you're, again, if you're going to Select USA, then it's, maybe you're looking to get your first customers in the U.S. So, sort of what, is there a geography or an industry that, is going to be most prominent? Sort of what are the big, because everybody's going to be at different stages. So what are the big questions that are keeping you from sort of that goal? And so, and then it's presetting appointments that will help you on the road to answering those questions, and getting towards accomplishing that. I think, the worst thing to see is sort of when whether it's Select USA or you get to some other event, and the first day, and people are at their at the the sort of the networking tables, and you see a team of people. I've had this experience hundreds of times, where they're setting the strategy of the event at the event on the morning it's happening, where there's just zero preset appointments. There's there's no pre-thought. I mean, at least they're doing it there. That's great. But the months before is really where the leverage is.
Yep. Well, Bill Kenney from Meet, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been America Open for Business, and I look forward to catching up with you in the next episode. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you, Cameron. It's a real pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the America Open for Business podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.